Okay, so Romans chapter 9.
I'm there.
He's ready.
There was a bunch of dust that popped up there.
Anyway, chapter 9, verse 4. And we were kind of dealing with the introduction there. Israelites, and to them belong the adoption, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the temple service, and the promises. The ancestors are theirs, and from them, by physical descent, came the Christ, who is God, over all, praised forever. Amen. Okay. I have played with this back and forth so many times because, in order to, you see so much in this text, and in order to kind of like, what's the heart of it? How could I say it in the most simplest way, right? Because sometimes, what's in there, in many ways, is very simple. But when you read it, it seems very complex, So I think one of the easiest ways maybe to look at this is that, the word adoption there, we started with that somewhere in time, well, I guess God doesn't have time, but it's somewhere along the way, He chose, started with a man. And who was that? Yeah, Abraham, right? So He started with a man. And He decided He would save that man and then all his descendants. That's right. So we see this kind of unfolding. In fact, it's kind of so powerful that Genesis, we only get to chapter 11 in Genesis, because in chapter 11, the first half of it is the Tower of Babel. After the second half of chapter 11 is kind of the lineage from Seth all the way through Abraham. Chapter 12 of Genesis starts with Abraham, and it runs all the way to Genesis 25, chapter 25. And at 25, it starts picking up, which is mentioned earlier, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 sons. And that's all that Genesis, almost all of Genesis, is just about this one family. All of it. We don't even hear about Moses till we get into Exodus chapter 2. So Genesis is really about this family, this adoption, this choice that God made to be able to save people. So if we look at that, we could say maybe simply that what we have in front of us is God has decided to enter into a relationship with us. And in God's point of view, God's position being God, He decided there were certain aspects that were necessary for that. So this list really is kind of like, what is a relationship? And what are the aspects of that relationship that actually have to be dealt with? You with me? So in this sense, remember how I said before, everything is about relationships? And everything is about relationships. Because all the stuff we have, that's going to pass away. But it is the relationships, and specifically our relationship with God, that is supposed to be eternal, forever, right? So when God comes here, and He has this list here, I'm looking at that list and going, oh, God is defining the aspects of the relationship that have to be addressed or have to occur. Are you with me? So have you ever, what makes up a relationship? Well, if we go through this, we might be able to say. Okay, so adoption, this idea of taking someone on and bringing them into your life. And in this sense, God bringing us in as His what? His own children, right? So He's a parent in this relationship. What would glory represent? Because it says right here, well, to the Israelites, to them have been adoption, and the second one is glory. What does that mean?
Glory.
Glory. That's right. Jesus, it means Jesus. Yeah, in a way. So glory is actually God revealing Himself to us. If you're going to be in a relationship with someone and you go, how you doing? And they're like, right? Because in order to get in a relationship with anyone, you have to be vulnerable enough, you have to be open enough to reveal yourself to that person. And intimate relationships are about that intimacy, right? I'm disclosing to you my loves, my hopes, my fears, my problems, maybe a wrinkle, right? My imperfections, my troubles, my trials, my history, my past. So when it says here that God revealed His glory, He's revealing Himself. Does that make sense? So in order to have any relationship with anybody or God Himself, you have to be involved in a what? Revealing yourself. So it requires both sides, doesn't it? God's going to be honest with me about who He is, and He's not just honest, He has a purpose in it. He wants to reveal Himself to us, right? He wants to do that. But in that sense, we also have to reveal ourselves to Him. That's right. Have you ever had those relationships that were one way? You know?
Don't work so good.
They don't work
Yeah, usually
good.
with teenagers.
Yeah, right. There you go. You don't ever get close to those people who never reveal themselves. Revealing yourself is very vulnerable. It's like nakedness, right? That's why in the whole issue of naked in the Bible is such a big deal. It's not just the idea of physical nakedness. It's the idea of being naked where you're totally revealed who you are and you're what? Vulnerable, right? That's at the heart of a relationship. So we could understand that. We say, okay, I understand that God is coming in. We're going to talk more about that issue. He's revealing Himself. Now, what is the issue? He brings up, well, this is another issue that God decides is important in relationships. Covenant. What is a covenant?
It's a promise.
Huh?
It's a promise.
A promise, yes, yes. An agreement, a contract, a way to enter into a relationship. Actually, the covenant kind of helps define the relationship, right? So if we think about it, let's look at this passage. Oh man, I've got a lot of static going. If we go to this one, which we went over last week, when the Lord came in. Now remember, Genesis 11 was the Tower of Babel. So we have all this, the first 11 chapters of Genesis, we have the fall of man. We got, what else is the other big one? Noah. Yeah, that takes up quite a few of those chapters. And then the Tower of Babel. Right? And there's some lineage stuff that takes place. But we've just opened the Bible, and all of a sudden now we're placed onto this guy called Abraham, right? And the Lord said to Abraham, go from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. And then he goes on to say, in fact, all the world will be blessed through this, right? That's a contract. That's a covenant. And in this covenant, how could we simplify it to its basic, like 4 or 5 words? We could say, go, and I will bless you, right? We could say that. In this sense, it's very, very simple. We could say, God comes to us, and He says, go, and I will bless you. Now, here's an interesting thing about the covenant issue. Because we're going to look at that, and what's the other covenant we should look at? The Mosaic covenant, right? We have the covenant of Abraham, and then we have the Mosaic covenant. Or we could call it the covenant of the promise, or some people call it the covenant of grace, and the covenant of the law. That's right, okay. So we got these two kind of covenants. God is coming to us, and He's disclosing stuff to us, but in His disclosure, He's making promises to us, right? And He says, here, listen, Abraham, you come into me, you enter into this relationship with me, and I will bless you. It's pretty straightforward, right? Pretty straightforward. The interesting point that we should notice here is that, let's say, me and Jonathan enter into a relationship. In that relationship, we tend to what? Compromise. We tend to, give and take. Jonathan doesn't come to me and go, Paul, this is the way it will be. He doesn't do that, right? He's like, I guess he could, but what do you do with people like that? You're like, yeah, I'm not getting involved in this relationship. No thanks. The control is too crazy, right? But in this sense, God comes in and He defines the relationship. There's not like, well, I got option A, and option B, and option C. God doesn't do that with Abraham, and he doesn't do it with Moses, and he doesn't do it with the children of Israel. He like comes in and says, this is the way it is. Why would he do that? Why didn't he like ask for our opinion? You guys are laughing. We are stupid. That's right. That's right.
And Jeremiah says the heart is deceitful above,
Yes.
that's
yes.
really wicked.
Yeah. So that brings in the point, are we in any position to be able to define a relationship of what we need and what we don't need? We don't even know what we need. And the stuff that we think we need is often wrong, right? Yeah, it's not even
But our mouths-
healthy for us, huh?
Our mouths just keep going though.
Yeah, our mouth just keeps going. It's like little Ethan. We had our grandson over yesterday, Ethan. And like I said last week, grandpa, 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 grandpa. So, okay. He tells me he wants this, and he wants that, and he wants this, and he wants that. And I just say, you're 5. You don't know what you want. Now, he does know a few things. Like, he likes mac and cheese, right? Yeah. And he thinks he should play in the street. Like, yeah, that's probably not a good idea, right? Or he might think this or think that. The point is, we don't know. So when God comes in, and then if we ask this simple question too here, Abraham, or Abram that he started out with, what if God just never came to him? Never contracted him? You know what I mean? Like, because basically God invades his life, and then he forms a contract with him, a promise. He says, go, leave everything, and you're going to follow me. Which kind of an interesting point. Can we follow God and stay where we're at? Usually not. Got to let go of everything if you want to follow him, right? So, but anyway, but God comes in and finds out. Why would God do that again? Yeah, because we're stupid, right? But it also brings up a little bit more of a rooted issue. When he comes after us, if you were to go adopt a child, and you say, oh, I really want this child, and they said, okay, I want you to meet with his doctors, what would you realize? Yeah. That child has pre-existing conditions, right? He has issues. So if he's been addicted to drugs through his mother, or been through, because they get active in utero, right? But you'd realize this child that I'm taking in isn't a blank slate. It's not just an empty vessel that I can manipulate how I want. I'm inheriting a pre-existing condition that this child's going to be a lot of work, or could be a lot of work, right? This is the same issue here. This idea of God entering into a covenant with us means that we have to already know there was a pre-existing condition with us before he even came to Abraham, right? So this idea, why does God define the relationship? Because we're already in a very bad place. We already have pre-existing issues. When I was about her age, how old are you? Not you. The young lady behind you. How old are you? 14. So see? I remember being 13 going. You should have said like 37.
No, I said 39 again.
Oh, 39 again. That's good. Let's say she's 14. How many of you knew by 13 you were like, oh, I'm a mess? Did you know that? Like, some of us knew that early on, right? I was like, oh, I'm a mess. This is crazy. I have pre-existing conditions. Do you know what I mean? I have problems, right? We didn't maybe realize the scale of it. We didn't realize what it meant to us. And by the way, we wouldn't even realize what we should do about it. And yet here, we find within this list, God knows exactly what to do with it. So when he comes and he says, Abraham, leave everything and follow me, and I will bless you. It changed the whole course of Abraham's life. If he would have just left him where he's at, he'd live out his life with his family and his culture and his location and wherever. But now he gets thrown into this whole other pathway, right, that comes about. And then also, if we look at the when Moses was called, right, this idea that God is going to later on we find out Abraham, and now when Moses comes, these are all the descendants of Abraham, right? And how long have they been in slavery to this point?
400 years.
Yeah, about 400 years, right? So 400 years they've been in slavery, and have they been crying out? Yes, they've been crying out. And God hears them. You know, he eventually hears them, right? He has his own time and his own reasons. But he hears them, and then he comes to Moses and he says this. So Moses thought, I must go over and look at this remarkable sight. Why is this bush not burning up? When the Lord saw he'd gone over to look, God called out to him from the bush, Moses, Moses. Here I am, I answered. Do not come any closer, he said. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. And then he continued, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said to him, I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt, and have heard them crying out because of their oppressors, and I know about their suffering, and I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians, and to bring them from the land to a good and spacious land, from that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a territory of the Canaanites, and da-da-da-da-da. I also have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. Therefore, I am sending you to Pharaoh so that you may lead my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So now we already see, oh, here's God again. He's made decisions for him already. Do you ever think that God's made a lot of decisions about you already that you just weren't aware of? You know, like He's made decisions before you were even born. He's made decisions about you. He's made decisions about what to do. And here would be an interesting point, is that all the Hebrews are in Egypt, and they're under slavery, and Moses is being called. But at this point, do they have any idea that Moses is called and that God is sending a deliverer? They have no idea of it. In their daily life, they're like, right? They don't, which is often true, right? We don't often recognize there's a lot of things God is doing in the background to save us all the time, right? He's always delivering us. He's always working for us. It's a lot of stuff. And just because we're unaware of it doesn't mean that it's not real, right? It's real. So there he is. Moses is called. And then God says, well, I'm going to send you, and you're going to go. And, of course, this starts a covenant. I am going to deliver my people because I am the God of who? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This idea about this promise that was made to Abraham, it never stops. It never stops. There's a little argument. Some of you might like the argument. You wonder about which was first, the covenant of grace, or the covenant of the promise, or the covenant of the law. Which came first?
Promise.
Yeah, the promise came. So here we have the covenant of the promise, which really requires what we call faith, right? Because it says Abraham believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. For those of you looking at this, there's an interesting point. We see the covenant of the law actually fits underneath the covenant of Abraham. God is about what? Saving his people. And so when we see here, we see there's an issue about he needs to adopt us. He takes an interest in us, right? He chooses us. We see he reveals himself to us. We see he brings us into an intimate relationship with him that is actually forces this issue of, will you trust me? Because it's really about trust. He tells, when Moses goes into Egypt, what is Moses telling the Hebrews? What is he telling them? You guys remember? What does he say to them? He says it all the time. Huh?
God sent me to save you.
That's right. God sent me to save you, and he's going to save you with that phrase? Huh?
Outstretched right arm.
That's right. He's going to save you with an outstretched right arm and power, I think it says. But he's coming to save you. He's going to deliver you. And the Hebrews said what?
Really?
Well, yeah, that's right. So different times along the way, right? They're like, oh, this is so awesome. And other times they're like, we don't believe you. We don't believe you at all. No, no. He's not going to deliver us. He's not going to save us. But if we can understand, God invades our life, and then he brings us into a contract or an agreement or a covenant with himself that says, trust me, trust me, and I will bless you. That is the covenant that was made with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 patriarchs, and all of those, right? That's the covenant that was made. And then we see, well, it doesn't stop there. Then Moses, they lead him out of Egypt. God actually does rescue them, right? He actually rescues them. And then God has a plan. He's going to bring them where? The very first place. Where's he going to bring them? Yeah, the wilderness. But in the wilderness,
The Red Sea. Red-
yeah, in the wilderness, he's going to bring them to Mount Sinai. And what's a Mount Sinai?
A lot of rock.
Yeah.
God.
That's right. What's at Mount Sinai? God. Could you imagine, like, if I say, Mary, let's go for a drive. We're going to go meet God. What would you do with that?
It's a mountain and
I
you
know, I
climb
started
and
to
climb.
pray about
I've been
it.
there.
Have you been there?
Yeah, and you climb and climb and climb until you get to the top.
Can you walk to the top?
Yeah, you walk, it's a little trail and you walk, they take you on camels. You go up first and you get on a camel and you go and then from there you start
You've
walking.
been there.
Wow. I've been there three times.
3 times. Wow.
By the grace of God.
By the grace of God. That's pretty cool.
What, a camel? Yeah, they take you in a camel when you start out.
I'd rather walk.
Then you're gonna walk up
Trust the
there.
camel.
Then when you get to the hill, then you start walking because it's a trail. You go up to the mountain.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, how many of you guys been to Israel? I've never been.
You gotta go.
Anyone?
You gotta go and you gotta go while you still can because it's a lot of walking.
Is it? Yeah, why you can still walk, you mean?
Yes.
Have you been to Israel 3 times? Maybe we'll just travel with you.
Okay, let's go.
Let's go.
Got a lot of pictures.
Okay, well, maybe we could do that one day if you bring in the pictures. You could tell us your story. You're open to that?
Yeah.
Okay. So and if you see it, God says, I'm going to deliver you out of Egypt. And by the way, Egypt was a place of slavery, right? There's a kind of a cool little passage. I got lots of static going on. I wanted to do that one little package out of Leviticus. Oh, wrong text. Leviticus 13. There we go. All right. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt so that you would no longer be their slaves. I broke the bars of your yoke and enabled you to live in freedom. One of the things that you could see how American culture has this really exalted view about freedom actually does come from the scripture, a lot of it, right? Because we need to be freed, right? We are in a land of oppression. We are in a place that we're regulated by oppression and fear and need and want and lust. We are oppressed. Like I said, there are pre-existing issues before God ever came to Abraham. We already were sick. We already were enslaved. And so here, if we would understand, which unfortunately modern culture doesn't see, that freedom is not doing what we want. That's slavery, right? Slavery is doing what we want. Are you with me? Abraham could have said, I really don't want to leave my family. I have good hot dogs here. I got some good friends. I got all this. Like, yeah, that's not going to work for you, Abraham. You're going to leave. That's what you're going to do. So the idea is that would it be true we surrender up what we would call our freedom, surrender up our own way, surrender up our own pathway, surrender up our own wisdom, surrender all those things, and make a choice to follow him. And God's going to say, that's the only path to freedom. And I would take it a step further. People, not a step further, just better description is that we're not fully who we are if we're not really in God. You understand that we are being oppressed on all different levels, or being driven by fear, or being driven by lust, or being driven by this problem, or that problem, or this sin, or that sin. True freedom. True freedom. And if you think about it, God doesn't break them free to only enslave them again, does he? No, he doesn't do that. He releases them, breaks them free, sets them free so that they what? Can live in freedom. I think it's Galatians chapter 5. It is for what? Freedom's sake. Right? It starts out, verse 1, I believe, is Galatians 5. It's for freedom's sake. So, we get to this place of the law, and we have to ask, well, how is this about relationships? How is the law about relationships? Yeah, you know, when you meet someone, you start to find out what they like and what they don't like. Part of their value system. And part of understanding one another is understanding what we like and what we don't like. The law is a revelation of what? What God considers is what? Good. This is his value system, right? Even though the law in its sense is only a shadow, it's not the full. The law is in no way the full expression of the glory of God. In fact, Hebrews is going to say the law is kind of like a shadow. It's not the fullness. So the law, though, is a revelation of who we're dealing with in many ways. And we said this last week. If someone comes up to me and I say, you want some chocolate ice cream? They say, no, I don't like chocolate ice cream. Then what do we know about them? They don't like chocolate ice cream. That's right. And if God says, don't commit adultery, what do we know about him? Okay, he doesn't like that. Doesn't really matter why. We could figure that out. We could ask him, we do that. But we know one thing about him. He doesn't like that. How about lying? Doesn't like it, you know? Yeah, how about using his name in vain? And by the way, that word using in vain means, carelessly. He means nothing, you know? I could throw his name around, and I don't mean it. Maybe I don't even use cuss words. It's just that it doesn't hold a lot of meaning or value. No gravity, no weight in it. It's just you know. So I just use it that way, nonchalant, don't care about it. What? Does he like that? No, because. So if we ask the issue of like idolatry, or adultery, or lying, or using his name in vain, who is that really hurt? Yeah, it hurts yourself, and of course it's going to hurt those that you get involved in. Is it going to hurt God? Not really, right? Like, is he going to suffer an emotional crisis, and maybe need some medication? You know what I mean?
He wouldn't need that, but he does get angry.
Yes.
And that's emotional.
Yes. So on that's a little bit different, right? It's not going to hurt him. But is he hurt about it? Yes, right? And he's hurt about it because he's what? A jealous God. And jealousy in this case is a good thing, right? So like his children. We watched some of these. Have you guys watched any of the school, what do they call it? The school board meetings? Have you watched any of those in the last couple of years? Oh, let me tell you. You see these mama bears come up. And I'll tell you, I look at them and I just, right? They are tough. And they're going after the school board because, the school decided to bring in the most sexualized books in the world for these, I mean, they're bad. They're pornography, basically, for these 10, 12, 14-year-old people, right? So they're just bringing, and wait till Mama Bear gets up there. Oh, it's bad. And I've seen a lot of them, dozens of them, right? Of where they go after. And it's so glorious. Because what? They're speaking up. They are jealous for their kids' health. Right? They're jealous for it. And they will fight for it, and they will protect their kids, and they'll do whatever. Same way with God, like you were saying. Right? He's jealous for us. And none of us like to see our kids go, or our grandkids go the wrong way, because we know the outcome of that. Right? We know the outcome of that. So when we look at the law, God goes even a step further, and he begins to reveal aspects of him that we're like, what? Yes?
Oh, this is going back to what you said earlier about, well, I don't take the Lord's name in vain, but I say other cuss words. And I'm feeling.
We love you.
But I mean, I came in this, I'm feeling guilty right now, but I found out that God doesn't care. Well, wait a minute. I walked in with some appetizers, and right in front of the preacher's wife, husband. Well, I was wanna, I forget her name, and I don't know why.
It's a month in the calendar.
April, that's right, I'm May, okay.
See, you got it now. Hi, May.
But anyway, right in front of April, one of them dropped, I think it was her fault.
Oh, that was good.
And I said, oh, that's chai tea, right in front of her. And I felt terrible, but now is it okay with God?
Well, so let's look at this. That's a good one, right? Because we can get all bound up. And we're not very good at relationships, right? We have extremes. Detachment, or I'm too close to you. You know, you ever do that? Right? I'm too close, too far, whatever. But like that. What if one of our own children say that? Are we like, oh, I'm so angry, I want to put them down? Would we do that as a parent? No, would we want to hurt our own children? Go ahead.
I always tell my kids, our kids, you know, you are setting an example for people around you. And number one is what's coming out of your mouth and your actions, is it honoring God?
Right.
And that would usually convict them of whatever,
That would work.
where they were going,
Yes,
you know.
yes,
So,
yes,
and
yeah.
it's for all of us.
It is.
You know, even those little words, Lynn, that you think are little, you know, you could, you know, somebody can look at you and say, well, you know, you say you're a Christian, but is it the total package, you
Yeah.
know? Actions, words, everything.
And by the way, are they looking for reasons to discredit Christians?
Yes, of course,
Every
yes.
day. Every day. Every day of every moment. But I think this is where we have to come back. Our God is about redeeming us, right? And so when we sin, He's not about destroying us or punishing us. He's not about that. He's about what? Redeeming us. There's a big difference. The woman that was caught in adultery, what did they want to do with her?
Stone her.
Yeah, they wanted to stone her. And maybe they didn't even care whether they stoned her or not, but they wanted to put Jesus in a fix, right? They wanted, we got you now, Jesus. She committed adultery, so you need to do Moses' law and stone her. And you could see that Jesus was like not going to go that way. He doesn't release her from her sin, does he? He doesn't say, oh, that's cool. No, he doesn't. But he also doesn't condemn her. He says what? Leave your life of sin. Leave it.
Go and send them.
That's right. You know, and don't go that way anymore. He could have easily allowed them to kill her, but he didn't. You know what I mean? So I think sometimes we forget our God is our Father. Right? He's our
And I
Father.
walked into his house and cursed.
Just find a different
Well-
word.
Bad.
Find a different word.
Yes, there's all kinds. We can make them up.
Yes.
Shucks. Aw, shucks. I don't even know where that came from. So, but here, going back to the law, we see this like wild. Do you know something? Out of all the religions in the world, by far, we have an encounter with a God that has defined it. Has defined it to a degree that no other religion even comes close to. Not even close. If we were to say, well, how do you find God? We have this whole issue here. Well, let us tell you. God comes into your life. He reveals Himself. He brings you into a relationship with Himself. He reveals Himself to such an intimate detail through the law. He's revealing Himself. You know, like I said, there's 613 laws in that. There's laws about animals, right? There's laws about all kinds of. It's an endless. There's animals, how you treat your, there's the laws about how you treat your slaves, and how you treat property, and how you treat your wife, and the laws are just endless. But all those laws add up to something. The manifestation of what's inside God, right? Oh, that's how he thinks. Oh, that's what he thinks about. That's what he's doing. That is like someone coming and pouring, I don't know, it'd be an infinite amount of information about who they are right in front of you. When we think that God doesn't reveal himself, we're so totally wrong. He reveals himself in almost excessive, extreme, like glorious, overwhelming, indescribable ways, right? And by the way, that's just if we get up to this point in the temple, the temple that comes up, the temple services, there is a description within the temple about how God is going to handle our sin, how God is going to bring us into reconciliation with himself, how he's going to handle us, and how he's going to help bring us to a state that we can actually enter into a relationship with him. Because let's be honest, everyone that's outside Christ is not in a position to have a relationship with God. Are they? No. They're angry at him, or they're running from him, or they fear him. The humans are so broken that they can't even enter into that relationship with God. It'll be all kinds of destruction. We all had this. I've seen it a little bit with my daughter, and we see it in other families. Sometimes you try everything you can to have a relationship with somebody, and they just will not let it happen, right? There's no way. And sometimes that's your own kids, and sometimes that's your grandkids, or sometimes that's your loved ones, or whatever. They will never allow that relationship. Or I shouldn't use the word never. At that point, you cannot tend to have a relationship with them. That's how pretty much everyone in the world is apart from Christ. They're not in a place to have a relationship with him. They're condemned, or their ego, they're enslaved to sin, they got pride, they got arrogance, they got so much stuff. And here we find out, God, like I said, do we have pre-existing conditions? Absolutely. And by the way, the pre-existing conditions are terminal, right? They're a spiritual cancer, and they're terminal, and they're destroying. And yet, we get to this revelation of God, the law. He reveals himself, but the law also reveals us, right? I think I'll pick that up. Okay, so I think I find it here. Not the law. Where's the law? There we go. Exodus, Romans. Let's do this. If we look at this, when you look in a mirror, you can see yourself. Now, we know that when we look in a mirror, how we see ourselves isn't necessarily how other people see us. Right? Isn't that true? You'll be like, got a bald patch. Seriously, right? You'll look, I had a girl come in not too long ago. Do you see that? And I'm like, it's right there. Can't you see it? You're feeling. You know what I mean? But she's a good example about what we all do. When we look in the mirror, we see, right, or I'm short, or I'm this. It's endless. Even when we look in a mirror and we're supposedly getting an exact representation of our body, even then we can't see it right? But the scripture goes on to say, the only way to really, really see who you are and see yourself is in the reflection of God himself. When we stand before him, we're with a whole different being, right? It's not another human we're comparing ourselves to. It's not something here. We are, when we look at him and he looks at us and that reflection happens, there's this, the possibility of an awakening and the knowledge that we are profoundly ill. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I get around someone that's really smart, you know what I realize? I'm done. Yeah, exactly. You know, I get around someone who's really pretty, you know what I think? Right? It's true, though, the reflection of meeting God. In the law, we see what? Aspects of God's glory. And that glory reflects back unto us. And now the law becomes like a mirror. Not a great mirror, not perfect, because we're not perfect. Right? But let's read this. He goes, he's talking about the Jews, and you know, sometimes some of us might go, yeah, well, at least I'm better than her. She cusses in church. So I'm better than her. I didn't cuss this morning. Although I've cussed here in church too. So. What then? Are we any better off? Not at all. For we've already charged that both the Jews and the Greeks are all under sin, as it is written. There is no one righteous, not even one. Do you think that's true? Yeah. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. Is that true? Yeah. All have turned away. All alike have become worthless. There is no one who does what is good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave. They deceive with their tongues. Vipers, venom is under their lips. Their mouth is full of cursings and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and wretchedness are in their path. The path of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. And then he says this. Now I know whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are of. I'm reading that. I've got the NIV stuck in my brain. Now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are subject to the law, so that every mouth may be shut and the whole world may become subject to God's judgment. For no one will be justified in his sight by the works of the law, because the knowledge of sin comes through the law. Now, so here's another really true issue. Have you ever, well, we all have, but you ever have that relationship with someone that's kind of partly crazy? You don't know what to do with it. It's kind of crazy, you know? And it could be very difficult to work out crazy, right? It's not easy to understand, what? I don't get it. What? You know, it's bizarre, right? Because often we're not able to kind of totally see into their hearts, and we don't know how they're operating. We just know that how they're operating makes no sense, and it feels crazy. When we look at this and we realize, well, that's true, then we need a diagnostic system that can help people realize that they're what? Crazy, right? Or that we're sick. We need a way to understand our own illness. And we're not good self-physicians, are we? We're not. We're not the healers. We're not the diagnosticians. We're not good at understanding ourselves. I mean, I'm sure we all run into this. Do you ever look at yourself and go, gosh, you do that? Do you feel what I mean? You're like, you know, I'm not saying all the time, but you get these insights at times where you're like, I'm crazy. You know what I mean? I got issues, right? If we didn't have God's law, we would not be aware of kind of how bad we really are.
Yep.
I got saved in 1983, not too long after high school. I really needed the Lord. Do you think today I need Him less? No. It seems like the older I get, the more I need Him.
You know, you have talked about your parents not
Yep.
knowing the Lord,
Yep.
therefore you do.
Yep.
After you became saved, did you get them to be saved?
I don't think so.
No.
But,
Didn't they respect you? Or
oh yeah, they were always good. They were great. That's fine.
I think the older you get, the more you realize.
I think so too. I agree with you on that. You know, that's why I think that sometimes getting older is a little bit harder, because you tend to see easier how easy, or you tend to see it much more clearly how easy it is for us to get into trouble.
Right.
And then you see it in your kids, and then you see it in your grandkids. You know, they just do this one little move, and you're like, oh, and you tell them about it, and they're like, I just did that. But in our mind, we're like, well, I've seen 50 steps that go that same way, and that scares me. You know what I'm saying? We do become much more aware, like you said, of the reality that each of us, in a way, is just a step away from falling into trouble. I think we could all say, I have to trust Him as much today as the day I got saved. And I feel like more today than I did. I was too ignorant to understand how profoundly lost and dangerous I was to ourselves. It's not only here, but if you remember, we went through Romans 7, which was really interesting. And notice what Paul says here. Now, here's the point. This idea of justification by faith, it didn't stop. It's embedded in chapter 9, 10, and 11. It's such a huge issue. We won't obviously get to it today. But it's such a huge issue, justification by faith. And you're going to see it kind of here, that there is a problem when we start to have a relationship with God that we base upon our own strength and abilities. There's a problem when we start to have this relationship with God of earning His favor. There's a real problem. And notice, Paul wants to earn God's favor in this text, but look at how the text says. What should we say then? Is the law sin? Absolutely not. So the law has, let's say, all these requirements. We'll just use the 10 Commandments. If you want to be right with me, obey the 10 Commandments. There are people that think they do that, but we can't help them, But Paul is saying, is the law sin because I can't keep it? Is it just too stringent, or it's evil, or it's like that? What is this law? It weighs and oppresses on me and beats me up, and I feel condemned and all that. So the law must be bad. But it's not really that, is it? The law's not bad.
We're bad.
We're bad. Yeah, the law's not bad. We're bad. So Paul says, absolutely not. But I would not have known sin if it were not for the law. So let's talk about this just real simple here too. Is that we all have different types of relationships. I have a relationship, let's say, with this one guy, and I do actually have a relationship with this one guy. He never, ever tells me the truth. Never. He never, discloses himself. He never reveals himself. He's never honest. And I hate to use the word never, but it's true. He's just never honest. He has built these walls up that are impenetrable. And I've tried penetrating through them, believe me. I go after him. And I could go after him, and he doesn't even hear me. And he just goes on with another topic. He's purposely, but anyway, the reason I bring it up is this, is that this idea of being in a relationship with someone requires honesty on both sides, right? It requires me being honest with you and you being honest with me. It requires revealing yourself and divulging yourself and being vulnerable. Vulnerability is part of every relationship if it's going to be a good relationship. When we come into God's presence and we trust Him, we are vulnerable. We could go the other way and harden our heart and not feel that vulnerability. But is that a solution? No, we're still vulnerable. We just try to block it out of our mind. We're at risk all the time, right? And it's much better to say, I'm at risk all the time. I'm at risk with God. I'm at risk with this. But I trust Him. The risk without Him is infinite, right? Absolute. So what we see here is Paul says, well, I would not know what sin was. One of the issues that God's bringing him to is, be real, Paul. You're not this Pharisee who's never sinned. You're not this self-righteous dude who you pretended to be. You're not who you thought you were. A son of a Pharisee, and a Pharisee himself, more learned than all his peers. He goes through his whole thing, right? He goes through all that. And Paul runs into this and he goes, oh, I'm a sinner too. I'm messed up too. This idea of being able to come, it's so refreshing to get the burden off your back and trying to hide yourself in life. Is it easy to hide yourself? It's always a threat. Well, they'll find out about me. So it's just better to come out and say, oh yeah, I'm broken. Did you do that? Probably. You know what I mean? You got wrong in your life? Absolutely. Do you think you might fail? There's a really good chance I'm not going to make it. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot better. So notice what he says here. I would not have known what it was to covet if the law had not said, do not covet. And sin, seizing the opportunity through the commandment, through the commandment, produced in me coveting of every kind. For apart from the law, sin is death. So he talks about this other issue. What if I just say to you, now I want you to really obey this, okay? I don't want you to think about a pink elephant with pink skin running down the sides with this long pink tail, bushy. You don't have that in your head, do you? Do you understand how the idea, don't covet, Paul says actually what? Brought about coveting. Do you get it? It actually brought about coveting. Or how about another way to say it? The more that you try to be perfect, the more you realize you're not perfect. The more, I have this thing I use in anxiety, teaching people about anxiety. The more important you make something, like, it's got to be this way. It has to be that way. What's going to happen? It's not going to be that way. The more you exalt something, the more important you make something, you know what the cure is to exalt in something really high? Crash. It's going to crash. If I say to God, you have to do this. I'm putting all my eggs in that basket. You have to do this. What's he going to do, probably? Not do it. You're not going to manipulate God, right? You're not going to play that game. Jesus says, whoever exalts himself shall be humble, right? Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled. Whatever idolatrous idea we lift up will fall, right? And in this sense, that's what happens. He really, really tries. Notice what he says here. For apart from law. Once I was alive apart from law, but when the commandment came, sin sprang to life, and I died. The commandment that was meant for life resulted in death for me. So the commandment that, for sin seizing the opportunity through the commandment deceived me, and through it killed me. So the law is holy. The law is holy, and the commandment is holy, and just and good. Therefore, did what is good become death to me? Absolutely not. But sin, seizing the opportunity, recognized as sin, but sin, in order to be recognized as sin, was producing death in me through what is good, so that through the commandment, this part is really important, I'll close with this. So that through the commandment, sin might become utterly sinful, or an utterly sinful measure. So here's what we find out about the law, God's revelation, His glory, His perfection in its limited ways and all that. We find out, the more we focus on it, sin comes to life. And that produces death in us. And so when he says here, we don't often know the true nature of sin until it produces that death in us. For instance, have you ever had this habit in your life that you know is death, but you weren't sick of it? And over time, you became even sick of it. You said, I can't stand doing this no more. Have you ever had that? Have you, see, when sin finally gets to the point where you're like, God hates it, and now I hate it too. Does that make sense? And that's part of the effect of the law, to bring us to a point, not only do I recognize it's evil, but now I hate it like He hates it. It disgusts me. Make sense? Right. And that's how God brings us. So God is busy bringing us into that relationship but now it's even more. All right, let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this time looking at your word. Thank you so much, Lord, that you came after us, you adopted us, and that, Lord, you're working in us and making us your children, Lord. Lord, we pray for the next service. May you bless the message. May you bless Pastor, Lord. May, Lord, you give us ears to hear. And Lord, we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.